Thank you all for joining. I know I am the last session between you and dinner, so I'm going to try to keep it on time, give you guys a chance to freshen up before what should be a really good dinner. So I'm going to walk through a new application that we are announcing here at Transform, C3 AI ESG. And I'm going to share a little bit about some of the challenges that exist in the space around ESG that corporates are dealing with. In the process of developing this software and in my prior experience, which I'll get into in just a minute, I've had the opportunity to engage with many, many companies and understand what some of the challenges are that companies are dealing with when it comes to ESG. And so I'm going to walk us through sort of a little storyline that helps emphasize some of the challenges that companies are dealing with in this space that we're hoping to help companies with this new application. And then we'll dive into the application itself. And go through some of the features, some of the capabilities that we hope can really help companies take their ESG strategies to the next level. So without further ado, let's jump in and I'll introduce myself. My name is David Parham. I'm a product manager here at C3 AI. Prior to joining C3, I worked at an organization called the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or SASB. That's a standard-setting organization that is now one of the most commonly used disclosure frameworks by companies for reporting on their environmental, social, and governance-related performance. And so I had the benefit during my several years there leading our standard-setting team to engage with really hundreds of companies over the several years that I was there and develop a deep appreciation for both the challenges and opportunities that companies are dealing with in putting together their ESG strategies and responding to the increasing calls for additional transparency and reporting on how companies are managing environmental and social and governance-related issues. And so it's that experience that I brought here to C3 AI ESG and have poured into thinking about how we can develop software that can really help companies really establish themselves as ESG leaders and accomplish their ESG objectives. So you're going to hear me say the acronym ESG probably about 100 times in this presentation, so just a level set on what that refers to. It refers to environmental, social, and governance. And when we think of environmental broadly as a pillar, this means things like how are you managing your greenhouse gas emissions? What is your water usage? How are you impacting biodiversity? For social, it's things like how are you guaranteeing the safety of your employees? What's your employee recruitment and retention strategy? What are you doing about improving diversity and inclusion within your companies? And then for governance, it's things like ethics, competitive behavior, really the systems that companies put in place to manage all of these issues within companies. And the important paradigm shift for companies that's happening with ESG is really companies' stakeholders are now evaluating companies on many, many more dimensions than just a company's financial performance. It's these non-financial factors that are really informing the decisions that stakeholders make that affect your company. So for investors, there's been a growing body of research that shows that these factors can affect financial performance at companies over the long term. And investors are really interested in understanding how companies are managing these issues as a part of their total value creation proposition. Customers now are asking this for this information more and more, whether it's consumers and wanting to understand the impacts of the products or services that they buy, or we're seeing this increasingly in RFPs from enterprise customers really wanting to understand what you're doing about ESG, what's your strategy. And other stakeholders that are important to you are asking about this too. Employees want to know what your company's values are when they're deciding whether to come work for you. Communities want to know what you're doing with your facilities in their own backyard. And so this is becoming a really strategically significant issue for companies in needing to articulate a clear ESG strategy and communicate how companies are managing and performing on these issues to a multi-stakeholder audience. So that's what we mean by ESG, and I'd like to share sort of a little story from my time at SASB, where I had a close contact at a company in the energy industry. And this was several years ago, and her company had been targeted by a shareholder resolution that had asked the company to significantly improve its transparency and reporting around ESG. Now, this company really didn't have an ESG report or a sustainability report before this shareholder resolution. And in negotiating with the filer and some of their major shareholders, they were able to have the shareholder resolution withdrawn with the understanding that they would significantly improve their transparency and performance around ESG issues. And so my friend at this company, Katie, she was tapped by senior leadership within the organization to very quickly, within a year, put together an ESG strategy and a complete and comprehensive ESG report to make sure that her major investors, her company's major investors, had the information that they had requested, or that shareholder resolution was going to come back and would not be withdrawn in the subsequent year. So I'm going to walk you through sort of what her thought process was and some of the pain points that she ran into. And these are pain points that in our development of this application, we've heard time and time again from all the different companies that we've engaged with in developing this software. So she wanted to know, how do I establish myself as a top ESG performer? And one of the first things that she decided to look at, folks in this room may be familiar with, there are rating agencies that look at the publicly available information on companies about their environmental, social, and governance-related performance. And they provide or they create a score or a ranking that is publicly available and is consumed by investors to come up with investable products. And she thought, I can look at these ratings and I can get a sense at how I'm perceived, and this can help me understand where I need to improve my performance so that I can come back to my investors at the end of the year and I can tell them exactly how I'm doing and what my strategy is to ensure that I'm a top performer. So let's take a look at these ratings and understand a little bit better what she found when she looked into them. And so I'm going to ask for some audience engagement. I know this is the end of the day, but bear with me here. So I'm going to walk you through 3 profiles of companies based on their ESG ratings. And the first company here that we can see was ranked in the top quartile of ESG performance, so a leader in the space. Really good performance on corporate governance, a good strategy around clean technology, but some concerns around the safety of their products. This is in the auto manufacturing industry, so issues around vehicle recalls and things like this, and some challenges around their relationship with their workforce, labor management. The middle company, bottom third, so kind of in the basement of the industry. Again, solid corporate governance, some challenges maybe with health and safety in some of their manufacturing facilities. So leadership, top safety performance, but challenges around attracting and retaining the top talent, and some questions around their long-term climate strategy. And then third company, just sort of middle of the pack, average performer, no real areas of outperformance, but some concerns around corporate governance and the relationship with labor. So is anyone willing to venture a guess? Who might that top performer be in the auto industry? Anyone willing to guess? Tesla, okay. Who might be that bottom performer? Interesting. Tesla, all 3. Nicely done. So these are 3 different rating agencies that looked at the same company, looked at the same publicly available data, and reached very, very different conclusions about the ESG performance of that company. Now, if you've read any of these research reports, and you just read that one research report, you can absolutely convince yourself that they're right. And they put together a very good argument about why Tesla might be a top performer or a bottom performer or just an average performer. Each of them are totally coherent arguments. So what's happening here? I think folks, obviously some folks are familiar with some of these ratings. There's been a significant amount of research that has been done that has found that many of these rating methodologies are characterized by very, very low correlation between them. There's a number of academic studies that have looked at this. My friend Katie was like, well, can't I just ignore these if they don't agree? And the answer is, you really can't, because they are drivers of an increasing share of global capital. There's lots of measurements out there of how many assets are allocated using either these ratings directly or their underlying data. I've seen lots of different numbers, but it's in the order of trillions of dollars that are incorporating ESG information in some way in how those funds are getting allocated. And so Katie's solution to this problem was, well, I know I'm not putting a ton of information out there right now. My reporting is very, very limited. So maybe the solution here is all I need to do is just dramatically increase the volume of information I'm putting into the public domain on my environmental, social, and governance performance. And then these rating agencies won't need to make as many assumptions about my performance, and that will help me bring these scores into alignment. So again, I'm going to ask for some audience engagement. So who thinks, just by raising your hands, who thinks disclosing more information will reduce the disagreement among these scores? Just raising hands. okay? Who thinks that it won't affect the scores at all? I disclose more, scores stay the same, okay? Who thinks it's gonna actually cause the scores to disagree more? Exactly. So this was some research that was done out of Harvard Business School, and they found that companies that increased their volume of information that they were reporting actually saw a decrease, more divergence among how they were rated by these rating agencies. And it's a pretty significant increase, 25 to 31%. And so why is this happening? So what the authors suggest is happening here is this is all relatively new. We're all trying to figure out what good environmental performance looks like and what bad environmental performance looks like. What's good social performance? What's good engagement with communities look like? And what does bad engagement with communities look like? And so a weird effect is happening here whereby disclosing more information just for the sake of being more transparent, you're actually adding to confusion in the marketplace. And that's contributing to less agreement among how you're perceived, at least in this case, among rating agencies. And again, this isn't something we can ignore, particularly for companies, because the authors looked at what happened to a company's share price and saw that when your scores diverge more, they see more volatility in your share price, higher risk. This affects your cost of capital. These things are important. So what's the solution? And the authors hint at this, and this is really, really important. This is something that we really focused on at SASB, is it's not about disclosing more information for the sake of additional information. It's about disclosing the right information. So what is the right information? The right information is the information that is about your company's strategy, the environmental and social issues that are important for your company's success, and selecting the right KPIs, the right measures of success that ensure that the market, your stakeholders, your employees, your customers understand, here are the priority issues for my company, and here's how I'm performing on those issues. And so it's not adding to confusion by disclosing every possible data point that you could disclose. It's finding the data that supports the narrative about how your company is managing these issues and how they contribute to your company's long-term success. So that's the scores. The next thing that Katie did was she said, well, these scores are a little bit challenging. What if I just look at my peers within the industry and I understand how they're performing, what issues they're focused on, and that can help me decide which issues I need to be focused on and figure out what my strategy needs to be, what performance needs to look like for my company so that I can establish myself as a top-tier performer. Okay, so this is another example. This is data that I've pulled from the, again, automobile manufacturing industry. I don't know why I picked on that industry. I think because they actually have relatively good reporting, so I could actually find the data. And so here we're looking at 5 major auto manufacturers, and we're looking at their absolute Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions, their direct emissions and the emissions associated with their consumption of energy. And so let's take the perspective of Honda here. Honda's looking across their competitors, and they're feeling somewhat comfortable. They're not the highest emitter, but they're certainly doing better, it looks like, than Volkswagen and Toyota. And so maybe the team at Honda thinks, well, we're doing fine. We don't need to take any significant, dramatic action here to try to reduce our emissions because we're sort of comfortably in the middle of the pack. So anyone have a guess about whether they think Honda's in a comfortable position? Based on my presentation, you could probably guess no. So what if we normalize these emissions by a unit of output? So here we're saying, what do your emissions look like per vehicle you sold in that year? And now, whereas Honda was hoping that they look pretty good, now they kind of stand out as being one of the worst performers in the industry, and particularly being very low efficiency with respect to the amount of energy that they're consuming per unit of production. So now Honda realizes, well, we might have a problem. We might need to have a good story to tell when our investors come knocking and ask us why we are one of the highest emitters per unit of production. And Volkswagen, who was looking really bad, is now looking a lot better. They produce a lot of vehicles. But what about GM here? So GM was looking fine on the last slide, and they're looking okay here. But what if we were to normalize now these emissions by a different denominator and look at revenue? Now, if we look at revenue, things change for GM. And why might that be? It's because they have a very different price point per unit vehicle sold than some of their competitors based on their portfolio of vehicles. And now they're not looking as good when you normalize by revenue. And this is really important for GM because if we move into a world where there is a price on carbon emissions, GM now is in a position where there might be an outsized financial impact on GM relative to some of their peers, given that their emissions per share of revenue is one of the highest in the industry. So why did I spend time on this? It's because many companies appreciate and find value in benchmarking, and that's a very useful tool, but benchmarking alone is not going to get most companies what they need to do the depth of analysis that's required to understand what my key ESG issues are, where do I need to be on performance, and how do I get a strategy in place that drives me towards that outcome. So really, companies need advanced analytics to help them slice and dice these data effortlessly to figure out where they stand and where they need to be. Okay, so the third thing that Katie did was she went straight to her investors and said, well, why don't I just go right to my investors and ask them, what are your priorities? And I can focus my efforts on my investors' priorities. And so there's lots of really great studies out there that go out to asset managers, asset owners, and ask them in surveys to identify what their top priorities are for ESG. So this was a survey that was done by NASDAQ. They went out to a wide range of asset owners, asset managers, and they said, what are your top ESG issues for companies? And in this case, the survey came back. And the top thing was labor practices, followed by climate risk, then diversity and inclusion, then carbon emissions, and then health and safety. Okay, these seem like important issues for many companies. And then another study by PwC, and this is a really good study. All these are good, but this PwC one has a lot of really interesting insights. This study went out, asked similar questions, asset owners, asset managers, what are your top ESG issues for companies? And they heard back scope 1 and 2 emissions, worker health and safety, diversity and inclusion, scope 3 emissions, and data security. So what's starting to happen here? We're starting to see some commonalities emerge. So we're seeing climate show up multiple times, diversity and inclusion. But we have a new one here, data security. And so for Katie, she's trying to figure out, is that just noise? Is that something I need to be focused on? Do I need to be investing heavily in improving my transparency on this issue? And then the third survey by Macquarie found, number 1, climate change, but now we see business ethics, human rights, there's diversity and inclusion again, and then something called responsible consumption. And so what's the point here? The point here is that there is signal that you can get from going to the investment community and asking for what priorities should be. So we can start to understand climate seems consistently important, diversity and inclusion. But there's also lots of noise. And this is exactly what Katie found. And for her, this was pretty frustrating because she's trying to figure out, I have finite resources. I can only focus on so many issues within my company. I want to make sure that I find the ones that are consistently the top priority for my investors so I can separate this signal from the noise and invest my finite resources in improving my performance and transparency on the most critical issues for my company. And what Katie asked me was, working at SASB, we engaged a lot with investors. And she said, well, can't investors just agree on exactly what we need to report? And we'll report that. We'd be happy to report that. And I think the reality of this is, it goes back to my earlier comments, that there is never just going to be a simple template for companies to fill out. Every company is different. Every industry is different. And investors recognize that. And I think a quote that I really like is came from Larry Fink, who of course is the chairman and CEO of BlackRock, who said in his most recent letter to CEOs, speaking about ESG, it's up to you. It's up to you to chart your own course and to tell us how you're moving forward. So really recognizing that it's up to management teams. Management teams are the ones that understand the issues. They understand which ESG issues are a priority for them. We want to equip them with better tools to help them do that. And it's up to you to tell us what the important issues are and how you're performing on those issues. So for companies who are waiting to just have an answer, have convergence, agreement on what the important issues are, that's probably never going to come because these issues will continue to evolve and investors expect companies to be responsible stewards of their companies and keep track with where these issues are headed. So it's this set of problems that we're trying to solve through our product suite focused on sustainability, and very specifically with C3 AI ESG, which is the focus of this presentation right here. The reason I want to mention the suite is folks who track this space probably know that on Monday, the SEC announced their proposed rule on requiring or mandating companies to disclose on their climate-related risks and their emissions. So I just want to mention we have an existing mature solution that helps companies track and manage their energy usage and carbon emissions through C3 AI Energy Management. In that announcement, surprising to some, they also laid out a pathway for companies to start disclosing their emissions in their value chains, their Scope 3 emissions. Our partnership with ENGIE, we have the Ellipse product that can help companies with that challenge. But what I want to focus on is C3 AI ESG, and what we're doing with that product is solving the pain points that I just walked you through that Katie experienced, and really helping companies to unify all of their ESG data that's scattered across their company in different existing enterprise systems, or perhaps squirreled away in spreadsheets on share drives. Help you identify what are the top issues for my stakeholders that I care about through things like natural language processing and sentiment analysis. Help you then establish clear metrics and targets to drive performance in the direction that you need to go. And then very easily compose all that data into reports that are consistent with the standards and frameworks that your stakeholders are calling for. So this is just a very short, very compressed glimpse of what the application is capable of. I realize we're running a little bit long, and I really don't want to hold you up. I know it's been a long day, but hopefully a very engaging and valuable day for everyone here. Please come find Bert and I at the Solution Hub if you want to do a deeper dive on this application, some of the capabilities, and anything around. If you want to talk standards, I'm happy to talk standards as long as you're willing to do so. But we'll stop the presentation here. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for your attention, and look forward to chatting with you all at dinner and at the Solution Hub tomorrow. Thank you.